Well, first off, Courtney, well done. Well done. And Mr. President, thank you for that very kind introduction. It's much appreciated. If my old Western professors were still alive, they would have inserted the word barely between Ralph and graduated. If my son George was here, he would have pointed out that his father was kicked out of Western in his freshman year for drinking too much beer and raising hell in the Viking Union. And if my parents were alive, they certainly would have commented on the fact that it took me 5.5 years to get a BA in history. I remember my father nonchalantly asking me in about my 5th year, "Is there any particular year that you intend to graduate?" For the life of me, I don't know why they asked me to speak at graduation. Let me assure you that this speech will be short. You can applaud to that if you want. I clearly remember sitting right out there, just about in the middle on that side. I only came to graduation to please my dad. My mother had passed away before that, the rest of our family. I could have cared less who the speaker was or the topic of the speech. All I wanted to do was to get my diploma, get my dad back on the highway to Seattle, and get back downtown to Cap Hansen's Tavern and get another 14-ounce schooner of beer. Speaking of Mom and Dad, the graduates have already saluted you, but I want you to know that tomorrow is the first day of your own personal economic recovery. I remind you, let's get on with it. You've been waiting 4 years or more. I remind you that 4 years ago, no one had heard of Facebook. Twitter was something the birds did on a sunny morning. We had not yet dreamed of an African-American president. Twilight was a time of day. Martha Stewart was just out of jail, and the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl. So let me just tell you a little story. The old prospector shuffled into town, leading a tired old mule. The old man headed straight to the saloon to clear his parched throat. He walked up and tied his bedraggled mule to the hitching post, and he stood there, brushing the dirt and the dust off his face and clothes. A young gunslinger stepped out of the saloon with a gun in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. The young gunslinger looked at the old man, he laughed, he said, "Hey, old guy, have you ever danced?" The old man looked at the gunslinger and quietly said, "No, I never did dance. Never really wanted to." By this time the crowd had gathered and the gunslinger grinned and said, "Well, you old fool, you're going to dance now," and he started to fire shots at the old man's feet. The prospector, not wanting to get a toe shot off, started to hop and leap like a flea in a hot skillet. Everybody was laughing and fit to be tied. When his last bullet was fired, the gunslinger, still laughing, holstered his gun, turned around to go back into the saloon. The old man turned to the pack mule, and he pulled out a double-barreled shotgun and cocked both hammers. The loud clicks carried clearly through the desert air, and the crowd stopped laughing immediately. The young gunslinger heard the sounds too, and he turned around very slowly. The silence was almost deafening. The crowd watched as the young gunman stared at the old-timer and the large gaping holes of those twin barrels. The barrels of the shotgun never wavered as the old man's hands firmly gripped it, and he quietly said, "Son, have you ever kissed a mule's ass?" gunslinger swallowed hard and said, "No, sir, but I've always wanted to." Well, there's a few lessons here for all of us. Number one, to the graduates, never be arrogant. Be a nice person. You can learn it now or learn it over time. Being a nice person will take you a long ways in life. A lot of you are going to be teachers, and whether they're little kids or adult students, the class will look up to you. Set a shining example. Be a role model for each and every person you come in contact with. Build a better world. Number two, don't waste ammunition. Learn how to be effective in life. Don't tweet your life away doing meaningless things. Speak your mind, but know what you're talking about. Shallow slogans and half-baked facts have led to a breakdown in civil discourse in our entire country. Most of talk radio and much of talk television is just what former Governor Dan Evans described it as. Imbeciles talking to idiots. Find and refine your voice. Cultivate your voice and speak up for a better world. Number three, whiskey makes you think you're smarter than you are. You don't need stimulants to be happy and do well. Half of our country is living on uppers and downers, and people by the millions are feeling sorry for themselves, while most of the third world, was just described to you by this young lady, lives on $1 a day. Make me a deal. When you save enough money to take that first big overseas trip, go to a fun country like France or Great Britain, enjoy the culture and the nightlife and the history and the pubs. But I also want you to follow me to the outback of Ethiopia, where I go every year to vaccinate kids for the eradication of polio, and see how most of the world lives. Only the boys go to school because the girls have to help their mothers to haul water from a dirty well that is 6 miles from their hut. Families that have never seen money and have no idea what its meaning or use is. People that have no concept of modern medicine, where the average life expectancy is 47 or 48 years of age. Sometimes the best stimulant in life is life itself. Go live the real life of this world. Number four, always make sure you know who has the power. Too often we think of power as something that comes from combat or the latest weapon system or the strongest army. But in fact, Western and the diploma you're about to receive gives you more power than most of the world receives. In the world of the 21st and 22nd centuries, education is the power that will count. It is no secret why the Chinese and the Indians and the Malaysians and the Singaporeans and the Philippines, peoples from all countries flock to our country. They come for an education and the opportunity it brings to their lives and the lives of their children. Our education systems are suddenly in trouble. It's not just the recession that we're now coming out of. It's the fact that our elected officials, and I hate to say I have to share part of the blame, have not only mortgaged the business, but we've also mortgaged the store. Unfunded pensions, health and medical costs, rising cost of government, commitments we cannot keep are going to eat us alive. Someone, and probably you, is going to have to say stop. And throughout that process, as difficult as it might be, remember that the most powerful and effective tool that government can deliver to our citizens is education. That's where the real power lies.